Hey, everybody, we got this week's reading assignment. We're talking about variation and how different varieties of different organisms means that they can survive in different areas. So let's talk about it. As always, I only have about 5 minutes, so if I don't get to the end, you can finish it. You've got this. All right. How does variation matter? Getting ready. In some areas of the United States, people who live in the country can smell the sweet odor of clover in the summertime. If you live in the city, you may never have seen or smelled clover. You may live in a place where clover doesn't even grow. However, this little plant has an interesting story having to do with variation and why variation helps it to thrive in one part of the United States but not another. What is the variation? There are two types of clovers in the white clover species. There's a plain clover and a striped clover. The striped clover looks like the plant in the picture. Plain clovers look like the same but with no stripes on the leaves. But it is not the variation of their color that matters. This plant has a much more interesting story. White clover is native to Europe and Asia. It was introduced to North America around 300 years ago. Both types of clover were introduced in places, but something happened. Scientists who studied plants began to notice a difference in where each type of clover was found. Poison is the difference between these two variations. It explains why they are found in two different areas of the country. The striped variation of white clover can produce a poison. There are two chemicals stored in different parts of its leaves. One is stored in the cytoplasm of the plant cells. The second chemical is an enzyme stored in the cell wall. As long as these two chemicals are separated, no poison forms. However, when these two chemicals come together, the enzyme causes a chemical reaction to take place and releases a poison called cyanide. Cyanide is poisonous to humans, animals, and even plants. Scientists have learned that the ability to create these chemicals is determined by the DNA of the clover. That means that the ability to create the chemicals that create poison is an inherited trait. How does the variation matter? Clover is found in many parts of the United States. When it was first introduced, both kinds of clover were found in both the northern and southern parts of the country. However, now almost all of the clover that produces cyanide is found in the southern part of the country. As you have learned, in the southern part of the United States, the weather generally stays warm most of the year. The variation does not produce the chemical that is found in the part of the country where the winters are very cold. Cold winters happen in the northern part of the country. In order to figure out the connection between the variation and the weather, you need to think about some ideas you've learned in middle school. You learn that cells and cell walls in plants are mostly made of water. You learn that water expands when it freezes. That expansion process can break the rock apart, can break a rock apart. Wow, that's how strong it is. Think about the clover that is found in the southern part of the United States, the poisonous kind. We know that some animals eat clover. Animals have learned, however, that striped clover that produces cyanide tastes bitter, so they avoid it and eat other plants, including what little clover they can find that does not contain poison. Consequently, very little of the sweeter, non poisonous plain clover survives long enough to reproduce. If the trait if the trait to produce the poison is inherited, then the alleles of the non poisonous variation are not getting passed on to the offspring. As a result, more poisonous alleles are passed on, which creates more poisonous clovers. That changes the population of the clover. Almost all the clover in the southern part of the country is the poisonous kind. But what about the other variation? In the northern part of the country, where the winters are cold, the water in the clover's cells and cell walls can freeze, expand, and cause the plant cells to burst because they are mostly water. When this happens, the enzyme and the chemical that produces the cyanide come into contact. The cyanide is then released as a poisonous into the clover plant itself, and the plant dies. In contrast, the plants do not contain chemicals, survive, and reproduce the following season. Those surviving plants pass their non poisonous alleles onto their offspring, so the difference in temperature in these two parts of the country leads to a different variation. That was an advantage in each place. Because of that, frequently each type of clover is different in each place. In northern states like Minnesota, there are more plants